Okay, excellent. Well, welcome to the next edition of the Legal Dispatch. I'm Tyson Ballard, Head of Consulting for Psych, and I'm joined today with the wonderful Marie Potel-Saville, which I just found out, who is a pioneer. I've seen that you're called a legal design superhero in the media. And founder of Amurabi, the legal design agency. If you want to follow Marie, you can on the Twitter handle. It's at Marie Potel-Saville, Saville, not the LLE. And also check out their website, amurabi.eu. So welcome, Marie.
Thank you so
Great
much,
to
Tyson.
have you. Really excited to have this chat after seeing you talk in Berlin, which was a wonderful talk. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Tyson. It's my pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, excellent. So maybe if we can just start by telling us, what you do and who you work for.
Of course. So what do? I created Amurabi, which is a legal innovation by design agency. That was back in 2018. So I work for this agency along with the team, obviously. And what do? Our mission is to bridge the gap between the law and its users. We believe that there are not any laws which impose legal information to be incomprehensible. We don't know of any of these laws. We do know, however, that there is a higher standard of clarity and accessibility of information that is imposed by the law. And therefore, that's the topic we tackle. We transform blind signed contracts or, compliance programs that no one would ever want to read unless they were really, really under duress into problem-solving tools and into solutions that empower users to make their own informed choices and therefore free choices. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know a little bit of Amurabi, but you also take an interesting approach to kind of solving that problem, also in terms of the resources that you have. So do you want to explain a little bit about kind of your team and the makeup of your team? And to me, that, is really interesting and I think a very different approach to the just stick a bunch of lawyers and in a room and try and solve the problem.
For sure. So our methodology is a combination of user centricity, which is obviously inspired by design and design thinking, neurosciences, because since I've discovered neurosciences, I've really, really wondered why it's not taught in law school. Plain language, because it's completely possible to keep the precision of the law while removing the jargon. And obviously all the depth and fantastic results of design, the various areas of design, whether it's service design, strategy design, graphic design, UX design. So that's the combination of methodology that we use. And to obviously our team reflects that multidisciplinary approach. So of course, there are designers in the team. We've got the fantastic Isabelle, senior UX designer, with over 10 years of experience. We've got graphic designers like Camille and Guillemette, neurosciences experts. So this is really important to us. I'm not, unfortunately, a neuroscience expert, but we're lucky to have a partnership with the awesome Dominique Ashby. She's the founder of Neuro at Work, and she's absolutely instrumental in everything that we do. And also Mathilde Auchat, who's a PhD in neurosciences. And of course, we also have project managers, because what we do is obviously a radical change in the legal industry. And so change management is an integral part of our projects and services.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, no, it's truly fascinating. Maybe switching it up a little bit and more talking about yourself, like what does a day look like? What does an average day look like for Marie in at Amurabi, and also maybe just surrounding the work as well?
Yeah, so interestingly, there's really no typical day, and that's also what I like about it. My Monday could be more like managing the team and inspiring them, and then organizing projects with the project managers, and then switching to researching the topics that we really care about, for example, dark patterns, and then giving a conference, and then it's really the variety of my days, which I love. Yesterday I was giving a conference in front of hundreds and hundreds of people remotely, explaining what we do, explaining the methodology, and that's also what matters, I think. There's no regular day, but it's always a combination. It's always focused on users. It's always caring about who we're caring for, who are the end users of legal documents, of legal information, legal apps, and inspiring them to perhaps reject the status quo. That's probably another key feature in our days. We never take that for granted. We always wonder, how could we make that better? How could we turn that problem into an inspiring solution? So I'm sorry, it's not very precise, but there's really no typical day.
Yeah, I mean, I find like with the, for founders and CEOs, it is hard to find a regular day, because it is quite varied, from travel to managing the team to, keeping your true north in terms of your strategy and things like that. But what about, I'm always kind of fascinated about morning rituals as well, like in terms of, do you get up, do you meditate, or do you check your emails, before you get out of bed, or, do you take a coffee or a tea, or, what are your morning rituals and habits, and do you stick to those?
Very good question. So for a long time, I had very bad habits. I'm fortunately and unfortunately a product of 10 years of Magic Circle. And that was a fairly long time ago. So even worse than it's probably now back then.
Yeah.
So to be perfectly honest, it took me a lot of time to get out of these very bad habits, which is, for example, what you said about checking your emails the minute you wake up. So unfortunately, I did that for a long time. And thankfully, thanks to all the work I've done with a coach and also just personal development, I don't check my emails when I wake up. I've completely stopped doing that. I don't check my emails in the evening as well, just before going to sleep, obviously. And yes, indeed, a couple of years ago, I started meditating in the morning. To be honest, it's a bit complex to combine that with family life and, kids waking up, having to take them to school. And, it's a bit of a juggle. But basically, I wake up, like 10 minutes before, like earlier than I should, do my meditation on an app. I'm an absolute fan of Headspace. And that's how I start my day. And then the craziness begins, to be perfectly honest. 2 kids, 2 different schools, juggling with everything. But it really helps.
Yeah, I sympathize. And I have 2 kids, and it's pretty much identical in terms of the situation. And just hoping that they don't wake up before you do, so you can get that time in.
Exactly.
I think it is, it's quite important to kind of remove yourself from the digital kind of realm at some point. Like, what other kind of ways do you kind of remove yourself from that?
So, because we're so focused on neurosciences, and I learn so much from our neuroscience experts, I realized that this craziness that we all went through during the lockdowns, having back-to-back video calls whole day,
Yeah.
that was absolute madness. We now realize it, and you've got studies, even from Microsoft, which is perhaps not the most concerned company about people's well-being. Even them acknowledge the fact that it's really, really bad for your brain. And so we set up calls. So we set up our calendar on Google to always have at least 10-minute breaks between the calls. And so it's 25 minutes calls or 50 minutes, it's the pace. And in between the calls, I always do a small meditation. That's my way. You could do something else. You could go, I don't know, if you're remote working, then you could, I don't know, have a walk in your garden or whatever. But I really use Headspace. It's so convenient. And so I do that.
Yeah, I do find with Headspace that it can put you in a place very quickly within, almost like within 30 seconds of just taking your mind off what you've just done recently in terms of that. And I do find, and I'd be interested to kind of know in terms of the neuroscience about this, but it's incredibly hard to finish a meeting, just go straight into the next meeting about a different topic. And be really present, and it's almost like 3, 2, 1 back in the room, like and not having that break in between is not healthy.
Exactly.
I'm sure.
The neurosciences behind it are very clear. Basically, you've got studies where 2 groups of people have been assigned the same tasks. And that included video calls. One group had back-to-back calls and then had to perform the said list of tasks. The other group had shorter calls with meditation in between, and you can even see the brain images.
Mm-hmm.
So the first group is all red, like it is really a stress for the brain, and that goes back to the very simple mechanism of our brain, which is to save its energy. So that's the way our brain works, like all the time. It always keeps like a reserve of energy, just in case there's a sudden danger and you need to either run away or fight back.
Yeah.
So we always try to save our energy. And what information overload does to our brain, therefore, because we're trying to save this energy, information overload is just too much. So we shut our brain, basically. We shut our learning process. And that's what happens when you go, from one call to the other, because it's just too much for the brain. It's information overload, and it's hugely inefficient. And when in this study, it's fascinating when you see not just the images of the brain. So one group is fairly like blue, green. The other one is completely red. And the efficiency in the tasks that were assigned to both groups is just completely different. So really, once and for all, we should all stop that madness of believing that we can either multitask. This is really an urban legend. We can't multitask. And again, tons of studies backing that. And we can't just go from one call to the other without breaks.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting topic. And one that I'm always striving to adopt, but not always 100% succeeding, unfortunately. But definitely food for thought. What about what is the most challenging thing that you find about your role as founder and CEO?
Okay, so to be honest, the most difficult is to be on my own. And of course, there's a team. Of course, I've got partnerships, and I'm developing those partnerships. But ultimately, the weight on my shoulders. And the fact that it's difficult to share that weight, and it's also, I should be the one working the most, and that's completely normal. And you can never, and you shouldn't expect from anyone in the team to dedicate as much energy as you do. You're always the one giving more, and that's absolutely the way it should be. I'm not saying anything to the contrary, but ultimately, yeah, it feels lonely.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I guess obviously when some people start a business, they do it with a partner, and you do have that kind of joint ownership, joint kind of weight on your shoulders. What did you entertain that idea when you were starting Amurabi, or
Absolutely.
it didn't eventuate in that way?
No, actually, I never wanted to set up a company on my own. That wasn't my intent at all. So what happened was that I used to be a GC at Estee Lauder, but whatever, and I had experimented legal design in my own legal division, and it completely transformed my own practice of law. And I just couldn't go back. There was like a lock-in effect after experimenting, that it actually works and that it's so satisfying. I just couldn't go back to the old templates. It was impossible. So I sort of had to take the leap. And to do so at the time, I had actually hired a provider for one of my projects. They were called DOT in Finland. Fantastic team of super talented lawyers and designers. We really got along very, very well, up to the point where they said, you know what, Marie, you seem to really enjoy that. How about opening the Paris office or something like that for DOT? And so that's really how it started. Otherwise, to be honest, I'm not sure I would have leaped into something completely unknown. So I had like the backup of DOT in Finland. And they were super helpful and supportive. So that was awesome. What happened then was that very quickly the Paris office boomed. And by the way, I'm saying the Paris office, but it was actually my own company, legally, structurally. It's just that we had this agreement that we would share resources, and it was basically a gentleman's agreement, and a trademark license, basically. But legally and structurally, it was my own company. It's just that the minute I appeared on the market, I was, completely clients really came very quickly. And so this sharing of resources, which we had initially envisaged, quickly proved not to work because I needed people full time. And so gradually I started to hire people, and then I started also to develop the brand. And at some point I thought, well, this does not make much sense to develop a brand that I don't own. And also, if it's my own team, then, well. So we had a discussion, and really I love everyone at DOT. We had a discussion trying to sort it out, whether I should purchase their brand or how it could work. At that time, they also were wondering where should their agency go, so they were a bit unsure. And so basically we decided, to call it a day in terms of our gentleman's agreement. And so I just created my own brand, but basically it was the same company, the same team, and it just grew from there. But we're still very much friends, and I love everything they do.
Yeah, that's a great story. But almost very similar to our CEO at Psych, with the work that he did at Asda in terms of transforming Asda, and then being a bit of a disgruntled employee because it was kind of like, well, what's next and what else can I do, and things like that. I mean, I'm always interested, like, in the internal conversation that you had with yourself, and kind of what made you do that leap. What was the discussion you had with yourself, and or your partner, and tell us that story in terms of, like, almost kind of, it'd be great because there must be one moment, right, that says, all right, I'm gonna take the leap, and it must be scary.
So there were two defining moments in that internal conversation with myself, and I talk a lot to myself, huh? But there was the first defining moment was so I was still a GC, and I decided to go to the Legal Design Summit in Helsinki. That was in 2017, and it actually happened in two different moments. So first, I attended the Brain Factory, which was before the summit. It was a 48 hours design sprint or hackathon, or whatever you're calling it. Anyway, it was 48 hours, super intensive, in small groups with mentors, and we were supposed to deliver a new solution to an old problem. Interestingly, but when I went there, what I was telling myself was, okay, this looks interesting, this methodology. I had researched everything about the legal design lab at Stanford. I had explored all of that. But I really had my doubts about how could this even work? If this is true, this is such a radical change. I mean, it's almost impossible, but definitely I should find out by myself whether it works or not, or whether it's just a nice idea. And what happened during the Brain Factory was that I really felt it, like even in my brain, that it was opening up. How can I explain that? So maybe just to take a step back, when I was in Magic Circle law firms, it was obviously very interesting technical work, but I felt that my brain was shrinking, like almost lacking oxygen. It's a bit odd. I know it seems strange because it's so interesting technically, but I had that feeling of my brain shrinking, and it was the exact opposite during the Brain Factory. My brain sort of, I don't know, expanded. That's the feeling I had. Yeah. And so I had to leave Helsinki to attend a couple of meetings as a GC with my fellow VPs, etc. So I went back to Paris, and then I went back to Helsinki like 2 days afterwards for the summit. And really, the conversation I had with myself was like, okay, I'm home at last. This is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. I had felt quite lonely in the past, in terms of trying to find solutions, and law firms don't necessarily care about finding solutions. It depends. But so I really felt home at last. So that was the first defining moment. So then, of course, I came back to my position as a GC, wondering how I could sort this for myself. And then the other defining moment was when so I did further experiments in my own legal division with specialized providers. And the other defining moment was when some of my fellow VPs, after a training I had delivered using legal design, knocked on my door after the training saying, hey, look, I had no idea that a legal training could be so not just interesting, but also empowering us to actually get into action without contradicting our business goals. I had no idea it could be like that. Could you please train my whole team? And to be honest, this never happens. I mean, when you deliver a legal training, the best you could achieve is have people politely trying to keep up with what you're saying. But the reality is, like, behind their desk, they're checking their emails, that doing other stuff, and they run away at the first opportunity. So this was really the other defining moment where I thought, okay, if business people want more of this, then that's the solution. And so it really helped me making the leap.
Yeah, really interesting story. I mean, it takes a lot of guts, I think, to go from, because I come from Magic Circle too, from Magic Circle to two really prestigious GC roles in Chanel and Estee Lauder, and then kind of making the leap on your own based on some newfound idea that you've just seen in a 4-day workshop or 2 lots of 2 days. So yeah, huge kudos to you. Maybe changing it up. Actually, but before I do that, I forgot to ask, maybe just for the audience, it'd be really good, I think, to explain what dark patterns are.
Oh, yes.
Because I know you mentioned that before, and I know we've talked about it, and it's super interesting. But I think especially with some new regulation coming in, it's even poignant to kind of talk about dark patterns.
Absolutely. So dark patterns, we now have a legal definition of dark patterns very recently in the Digital Services Act. So basically, dark patterns are online interfaces that either deceive or manipulate users, so tricking them basically into doing things they wouldn't do if they realized. And so that's the legal definition, but we should also be aware of the fact that there are many scientific definitions, that there has been a fantastic research work in academia on dark patterns. And so the legal definition is somewhat limited compared to the density of work and thinking that's been put there by academia. Now, our work as regards dark pattern, it's really interesting also about how I took the leap into creating the company, because actually I did a master's degree in innovation by design, and that's how I discovered dark patterns. That was the first instance, so back in 2017. And when I realized that there were actually techniques based on our cognitive biases, because I forgot to mention, of course, the reason why a dark pattern works is because it's based on our cognitive biases, and it manipulates our cognitive biases to make us do things. Like, for example, a very classic basic example is the fear of missing out, that we all do, we all have. And so autoplay, obviously, manipulates that, or also the sort of laziness that we all have in us, that if there's a default setting, then we won't necessarily take a positive action to untick the box. So we just leave it as is. So when I realized all of that, the first question I asked myself, so a long time ago, was, okay, but if there are dark patterns, then, there should be the opposite as well.
Yeah.
If we can manipulate cognitive biases to trick us into doing things against our own interest, basically, then there's probably a way of perhaps manipulating cognitive biases, but for, nudging people. In other words, nudging people, but for their own good, which is really the distinction between dark pattern and nudge. And so we've been developing the opposite of dark patterns since the beginning of the agency. We call them fair patterns. The idea is to develop interfaces that equip users with knowledge, so that it empowers them to make informed choices, therefore free choices. So that's the work we've been doing since day one, really. And over a year ago, we decided to create a small R&D lab. And dark patterns is one of the key topics that we're researching. So we're almost to the end of this work now.
Yeah, that's a fascinating topic. I mean, and do you think, are these intentional?
Very good question. So in the legal definition, very wisely so, the Digital Services Act does not say anything about intention, because as we know, as lawyers, it's terribly difficult to prove.
Yeah.
When you research all the academic articles, some of them address the issue of intention. Clearly, when you dive into the topic, you can see that, you've got like good UX principles, like guiding the users, empowering users not to make mistakes, for example. And when you see the type of dark patterns, clearly most of them are intentional. For example, so Harry Brignall is the UX designer and PhD in neurosciences who coined the term dark pattern. And one of his most famous, unfortunately, dark patterns is what he calls roach motel. What it means is that something that's very easy to get in, but very difficult to get out. And so the classic terrible example is the free trials. You know, all it takes is one click to try for free, when actually, because you put your credit card details, it automatically turns into an annual, automatically renewable subscription.
Yeah.
And when you realize it's a subscription, usually there are many articles about that. Usually people find out on their bank account because they see a recurring amount being deducted and they don't even know why. So that this is as bad as it is. And then when they try to cancel the subscription, this is where all the tricks and the manipulation is really obvious, because all it took was one click to subscribe, or try for free rather.
Yeah.
And it could take up to, I don't know, 10 clicks. And even in the worst cases, it's not even possible to cancel online, and you have to call someone or to write to someone, which is clearly intentional. So unfortunately, it's terribly intentional. There's also a very interesting article written by researchers, namely at Princeton, who actually uncovered at least 23 providers of dark patterns online. Like, you go to them and you can purchase a dark pattern. For example, a widget that you plug in your website that puts a timer. Like, oh, this offer is going to expire in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And it actually runs all the time.
Yeah.
You can actually purchase that online, which is completely crazy. But thankfully, and going back to your original question about the legal framework, thankfully the FTC in the US is definitely taking a hard line against dark patterns. They've been doing workshops. They released a report in September of this year. And Europe as well is also tackling dark patterns through the Digital Services Act, but not just. What's interesting is that you've got very solid grounds against dark patterns in data protection law, obviously, so GDPR and its equivalent, consumer law, and some even competition law could be used against dark patterns. So we've got a number of legal tools. Now what we need is to raise awareness, because most people obviously don't know they're being manipulated. That's the whole point.
Yeah, and I think even as a consumer, you kind of feel powerless, to be honest, really. I mean, obviously, those of us who are kind of closer to the law and potentially closer to kind of these topics would know, but how does the average Joe know, or Joanne know that to what to do in those circumstances, and how they can get out and things like that. But I guess it's up to the powers that be to kind of push that behavior out of the companies that are kind of acting in this way.
Yeah, and also, because it's so difficult for people to, one, spot that there's a dark pattern, and second, even when they spot it, there's a really great study about that by the University of Luxembourg. There's a difference between people being able to spot there's something wrong. They don't necessarily know how it's called, but okay, this is a trick. But it does not necessarily mean that they're able to resist it. So in other words, you've got two problems: one, spotting the manipulation or the deception, and second, resisting it. So that's why you've got a number of regulators or legislative bodies thinking that ultimately, if we let internet and also Web3, grow all these dark patterns, that could be a threat to considering market economy being considered as the best model we know.
Mm-hmm.
That they go as far as saying that, for example, OECD states that the reason why we currently think that market economy is the best or the least bad system is for a number of reasons and a number of conditions, including transparency of the information. So transparency is a condition for market economy to produce the best benefits for consumers.
Yeah.
Okay. And so they say that if, the web, and including Web3, is absolutely full of opacity and tricks and manipulation, then perhaps market economy is no longer the best system to produce the most benefits for consumers.
Yeah, super interesting.
So, it makes you...
Yeah, what's
you
next
think.
then if it's not? Yeah, 100%. Excellent. Oh, well, thank you so much for the explanation. Like, obviously a topic that is another super interesting topic that you guys are tackling. Maybe changing it up a little bit. Like, if you think of the word successful, who's the first person that comes to mind and why?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I think it's difficult for me because I don't really think in terms of success, perhaps strangely.
Yeah. Why is that?
Why is that? I guess I've always put first like the interest of things, like the intellectual interest, like things that stimulate my brain or that make me I don't know, feel happy, but not necessarily in terms of success.
So then if I was to maybe to change it, so if you were to think of the word interesting, who is the first person that comes to mind and why?
There are too many. That's my problem.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it doesn't come to me just now. I've got too many names in my head to pick just one.
Okay, well, maybe you come back to me on that one.
Yeah.
What about another maybe interesting question? What about if you were to give a TED talk that is something that is not in your area of expertise, so not legal design or anything like that? What would the talk be about?
The topic would be precisely how do we create a model, an economic model, where we are not the products,
Yeah.
where we use digital economy to our own benefit, to thrive, to grow, to learn things, and not having companies learning so much about ourselves and then tricking us or manipulating us or profiling us.
Yeah.
So that would really be, what are the economic incentives to shift data economy to perhaps something else, which is way more focused on humans being able to grow through digital economy, to grow mentally, to grow, to thrive as human beings, and not being utilized as we are.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It would be a beautiful thing. I think if you've got kids, right, you're probably less. I mean, I'm pre-internet, so I'm kind of. I think I feel like less attached to the digital realm personally, even though it's kind of part of my everyday existence, like most people. But I do worry about the next generation in terms of You know, like my little one knew how, you know, if a phone doesn't swipe right, he's like, what's wrong with this phone? It's broken, you know, like, whereas we've come from that generation of the beautiful Nokia 6110 that the battery lasted for a month. But yeah, I agree. Like, how do you know, make our kids and the next generation after that kind of thrive in this kind of new digital space? But hopefully they're all with the information that they've got at their fingertips, that they can solve some of those big problems that collectively that we haven't been able to in so far. I'm interested about kind of the learning the lessons, kind of which you touched on just now, like, and which I think is a really important thing. And sometimes you can only do that by making mistakes. So if you had a favorite failure in your life, like, what would that failure be, and why?
Oh, I fail all the time. I think my favorite failure, what is it? I think it's trying to, there are so many things you need to learn when you manage a company, when you create a company, and I think my usual failure is to first try to understand exactly how things work. Like, for example, I don't know, silly things, but like marketing, I don't know a thing about marketing. and my natural inclination would be to first, do all the research, try really to understand absolutely everything, and then try to see how I could somehow do that. Whereas obviously there are very skilled people who know all about it, and so yeah, that's a mistake that I'm really trying stop doing. Trying to just solve everything by myself, and instead, of course, just relying on very skilled people who just are here to help.
Yeah. It's like, I think Steve Jobs always said that, right? Didn't he? He said, kind of, make sure you surround yourself with in a room with people that are smarter than yourself.
Exactly, smarter than yourself. Exactly.
Yeah, which,
Yeah.
to be honest, I feel like that's quite often the case for me. But yeah, like, I agree. Like, I think it's a you know, sometimes I think if you've got so many wheels spinning as a founder of a company, it's impossible to be an expert in every single area. So kind of learning where to kind of focus your efforts, where you can
Exactly.
thrive as well, I think
Exactly.
is equally important, and can contribute. Um, I'm nearly finished the book, The Design of Everyday Things, which was on your recommendation, on the last time we talked. I'm quite interested because I saw, obviously we're probably more involved on the legal technology side, and in I think, I can't remember, is Don Norman, is
Yes.
the author, and
Yeah.
he's quite passionate in saying um, that a user experience shouldn't be kind of driven by lazy coding, kind of in that book, and I found that fascinating because quite often in the legal space, because it seems to me still very kind of like not quite pioneering, but it's still the early days really in terms of the user experience, and quite often we are always saying, oh, but that's a constraint of the system. Oh, you can't do that. It's a constraint of the system. Like,
Exactly.
what are you guys seeing in terms of the work that you're doing, in terms of kind of the key areas of improvement that you think that technology can do in the legal space? Because I know you kind of tend to do quite often, like, template, playbook kind of design and terms and conditions and dark patterns. But on the technology side, what's your opinion in terms of, like, what are the key things that we should be focusing on, in kind of some of the key tools that legal uses?
So we never start with tech, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Our starting point is always the needs of the users, and their pain points and how to solve them. Now, of course, we embrace technology as one of the potential tools that can
Yeah.
solve users' problems. But it's always, I'm always very cautious. Because, for example, it was a long time ago, we created a legal platform for Orange. They've got 700 lawyers in the world, and we created a legal platform for the 700 lawyers.
Yeah.
And of course, we started with interviewing users, and a very recurring remark we got during the interviews was, you know what, I'm feeding the machine, referring to tech tools. I'm feeding the machine, but I don't think that the machine is feeding me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really how we should see tech, as something serving our needs, solving our problems, not the other way around. In other words, to me, digitalization is not a progress in itself. It shouldn't be an end in itself. It's only to the extent that it can solve users' problems that maybe that could be used.
Yeah.
This being said, I'm absolutely amazed by the results you can get in terms of data mining and the speed at which systems can now find information, the volume of data that can be assessed in like 1 second, and that's exponential, of course. That's Moore's law. It doubles each year.
It's Moore's
been
law,
doubling. It's been doubling each year since, like, I don't know, the 70s. So this is absolutely mind-boggling, actually. I think the opportunity is clearly in terms of making knowledge accessible. This is a fantastic opportunity. Now, the danger is obviously information overload, and it's also which information you make accessible to whom, which goes back to the manipulation point and the profiling point. So it's a huge, huge opportunity, but then I think that there needs to be human centricity, put at the core of everything we develop from a tech point of view.
No, I agree. Which kind of is what he touched upon in that book, I think, which is quite an interesting book. But yeah, okay, I agree. Maybe I'm just conscious a little bit of time, but I've got 2 more questions that I really wanted to ask you, which was, what advice would you give to your younger self, knowing where you are now and experiences you've had and things like that? Like, what advice would you give?
I would advise my younger self to worry less and enjoy more.
Yeah.
Definitely. I've at the same time, I recognize that, triple checking and doubting, not just triple checking, but doubting the system, doubting a number of things, is a very powerful driver to reject the status quo and achieve new solutions. So it's just that, okay, I should probably keep, that questioning part, but taking the worry out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really good. Because I guess in some respects, like to have the knowledge where you are today, you've probably had a really great foundation of lessons learned throughout your career in terms of Magic Circle and in-house, and probably those things you would never really want to change, but it's more kind of like because that is kind of giving you the foundations to launch a fantastic career, right, in terms of your new business. But yeah, definitely, I think, and even cognitively, worrying less must be much more healthy for you, I imagine.
Exactly, and I didn't know that at the time, and oh yes, and definitely I would advise my younger self to learn as much as possible about neurosciences early on. It was really stupid. I discovered neurosciences after 20 years of practicing law. It's ridiculous, really.
Yeah, excellent. So final question is, if you had a theme song, what would be your theme song?
Oh, what would be my theme song? Okay, this is going to sound really, really cheesy, but I think he would be happy.
The Pharrell Williams
Yeah.
song. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean that's on high rotation for the dance lessons every morning before school we have in our music room. But yeah, great song, great artist actually, and quite an upbeat one, especially for a Friday, right? Like
Yeah. Just, something really light and easy.
yeah. Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've learnt lots, and hopefully for everyone out there in the audience, they have too. Please don't forget to check out amurabi.eu. It's amurabi.eu, if I'm correct. Some wonderful work going on, and yeah, thanks once again.
Thank you so much, Tyson. It's been a real pleasure.
Excellent.